Why would Doom be motivated by what Steve did? So my explanation for this is that when Steve gets on the time platform and he goes to return the stones, he will realize the truth of the multiverse, potentially from the Red fucking Skull, which would be sick. Right? So just imagine it like this. This is the way I would write it, by the way. Opening scene. Steve Rogers on Vormir. He comes down, says, son of this. Which, by the way, you know who would know the truth about Tony Stark's birth would be the Spectre. It would be the Red Skull. Oh, my God. It's kind of interesting. So anyway, Red Skull and Steve have a conversation. Of course, Steve would try to fight him at first and all this sort of shit, and then Red Skull would probably drop some sort of whimsical, esoteric knowledge about the multiverse on him. And essentially, what I think would happen is that Steve would realize that the entire multiverse was a lie. And he would have the opportunity to undo it. Like, he would literally be there like, oh, this wasn't actually real. I could actually restore the real universe. But I think the reason Steve will not do that is because of his friend Tony Stark, because of RDJ. Because RDJ says to him, I have to let you know my priorities. Bring back everything we lost? I hope so. Keep everything we have? I have to. Meaning, we're not changing time. And so I think Steve will realize that that reality is fake. But he will, instead of deciding to change it all, he's actually going to become the person that makes sure it all goes the way it's supposed to go. So instead, he goes all the way back to the 60s, lives on a secret life with Peggy, and he's literally kind of guiding things like a Kang variant himself to make sure that everything happens the exact same way it's supposed to, which kind of explains the end scene in Endgame a little bit more. There's a lot of like ways that makes sense. Now, I've talked about this before, but Michael Waldron, when he was doing a lot of press for Loki, was asked a lot about Peggy and Steve and stuff because, number one, that had just happened in Endgame, which, by the way, Waldron said in an interview he watched Endgame before finishing the story for Loki. Like, he talks about watching this assembly cut and the CGI wasn't done, but he watched this whole crazy thing of like Endgame and was blown away by it and all that sort of stuff. The point is, Waldron was asked a lot about like Steve and Peggy, and he was very cagey about it. He like dodged the question in a way that would suggest that whatever the answer to those questions is something really important to what the overall plan was to bring these characters back. Because I've said basically since Endgame that Secret Wars was next and that they were planting the seeds and building that, right? So that's my explanation for it. But I don't know what it is. We'll see. Slicky Glicky says, what about your theory on Tony fighting in the Secret War during Endgame? Yes, but you have to understand that that's like essentially what that is. Like, you know how the TVA would go back and grab people out of time? I mean, it technically grabbed... it grabbed Loki out of time, but like they just go back and grab people out of time. Okay, so my theory about that is that when Thanos bombs Avengers Tower at the end of Endgame, while that explosion happens and everybody's in chaos, Loki recruits Tony Stark from that moment and takes him to the Secret War, and then returns him. And then that becomes the explanation for, number one, why why Tony is just there with the shield. And he's like, if you lose this again, I'm keeping it. And Steve is like, what happened? Right? Steve, the soldier, getting up out of the rubble. What happened? And Tony says, when you mess with time, sometimes it tends to mess back. You'll see. And the context of that never really made sense because Tony should not know immediately what happened. He might know that they've been attacked. He might even know it's Thanos. But how does he know it's time? That's the part that doesn't make any sense. So if Steve knows Tony, I keep fucking this up. If Tony knows that it's time, it would imply that he has some knowledge of time in that moment. And wouldn't that be the perfect moment to grab Tony Stark out of, take him to the Secret War, bring him back, and then He fights against Thanos, and then when he says, I am Iron Man, it brings on a whole new meaning, because this is a guy that went and fought in the Secret War against Victor Von Doom, a variant of himself. This is the guy that basically learned that he actually is a Victor Von Doom variant by birth. And so when he says, I am Iron Man, it's a reclaiming of his identity. This would be a retroactive continuity. But to me, I think it's brilliant, right? Because, like, I am Iron Man, like, it's cool, like, it was fine and all that. But I think you add this element to it, and it becomes even cooler. Do you know what I mean? Which, again, like, I can't promise you this is what they're doing, but in my head, like, I'll just explain it to you like this, guys. You know, it's sort of been implied by, like, different people that are talking about this, the Russos, McFeely, you know, Simu, Louis, Channing Tatum won't shut the fuck up about it. But it's just kind of being implied that, like, this is really wild. This is whatever this is, it's very crazy. You know, Russos have said multiple times they want to challenge the audience, you know? Channing Tatum said it's going to melt your brain, like people are not ready, you know, all these different things. So when I hear that, I kind of then say, okay, well, what could satisfy that? What would make me think that? And that's how I got to the conclusions that I got to. Right? Doesn't mean it's real. But, like, that's what I would do.